Welcome to Techtastic, where we navigate the intersection of technology and business, uncovering innovations that redefine our world.
Vladimir Baranov, welcome to It's Techtastic. It is lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me here.
So one of the reasons I was really excited to get you on this is I am going through right now with my company, the thing that you coach people on. And you've had a lot of experience coaching startup founders. You've run a bunch of your own companies, and you currently offer a service coaching founders, right?
Yes, I do. Founders and technology executives, yeah.
So I'm curious about that and technology executives. What is it about the technology executive that relates to the founder that needs that same level of coaching?
Oh, absolutely. What I have identified in the market is that we, as technologists or founders in technology industry, very much focus on the product and client interactions, trying to reach that product market fit. And sometimes we are not paying attention to the relationships between ourselves and our teammates, or between ourselves and executives, or between executives and the company. And there is a great risk that over time, if goals, outcome, relationships are not in line in the company, they can bring the company down at the worst possible moment. And if we start talking about those issues beforehand, it's almost like setting up those metrics or analytics before you start launching the website. You will have a pulse of how your company actually feels on the inside, and that will enable you to monitor it as the company grows and goes to that product market fit eventually and generate those great revenues for you. So that's where I see the parallels. It's the founders venturing into the business. It's growing, but the connections maybe not still investigated and debugged, or technology leaders are not yet aware that those interfaces exist, as they are right now focusing very much on individual contribution from the technical perspective, but they're not yet know how to develop their human interfaces to influence others and to achieve what they're looking for.
So I love that the focus on the human interfaces piece, and you remind me of a topic that's come up a lot in my past. I've been in technology long enough that I can remember being the computer guy in a company, right? And a lot of people that are in very senior roles in large companies today, that's how their career started. They were the computer guy. And when the company said, hey, we're going to start being a technology company at some point in the past, they hired people and they said, hey, computer guy, manage the technical people now. That was how you got trained to be a manager, right? And then that just continued up until you're sitting in like the C-suite going, I know what I'm doing, but you really don't. You haven't been trained on being a human manager, a human leader. It's like front-end development versus back-end development. You're very competent in the technology side of your job, right, but the front-end part, you've had no training on, you have no experience in.
Absolutely.
And it's been a real tragedy, I think, of the technology industry is that we look for the best software engineer and we say, you're going to be the team lead. And then we say, you've been team lead, now you're going to be a manager, and now you're going to be a director, a VP, and you're going to keep going up that way for the people that are interested in it, right? Yep. But again, no training, no expectations of what that means. You fumble your way through it. If you're lucky, you get a chance to try again. And it starts on a technology company. Like we start in a small room at a folding table, working on the same project together. We have easy human interaction. But like with COVID, a lot of us started our technology companies remote. I don't see my team, right? When am I going to see them? And the no standing meeting thing. I don't want to get in the way of their flow, right? I want their hands on their keyboard. I want them focused and I want them creating. So that human piece, we almost run away from it. How do we get it back? How do we make that connection?
The way you phrase that and the way I believe other technology companies are working is we're always trying to optimize, which always try to build something more and more and more efficient. But we're always do it within the domain of our knowledge. We know how to write code, so we believe if we want to write more code, a more efficient product, we just need to write more code. And sometimes it could be true. But in the end, we're running code which will then be used by other humans. And we have mental models of those other humans, how they will use that code, but it's not necessarily the truth. And realigning those mental models with our users takes a lot of time. And as you mentioned before, product market fit is part of that to understand how your user thinks. Now, if one developer has a user mental model and another developer has a user mental model, chances are those models are not the same. And if both of them are running at 100 miles per hour developing code for their own models, by the time they commit the code, by the time it all gets checked, and by the time it goes to production, The user will experience different interfaces in your application because a different developer wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can always apply layers of changes to make sure that people have the same theme, but the idea, the underlying kind of like humming engine understanding of the product by the developers will not always be perfect. And thus, it's a really good exercise to once a week, twice a week, once a month, whatever the cadence is appropriate for the team, to align first on how they understand the user, and then eventually to how they understand each other. Because there's opportunity for meshing and communicating with each other in a way that does not require words, which develops over time, or specific kind of communication. But if you do not talk to each other, you do not get that model training data necessary for you to define that interface between each other that enables you to accelerate. What I'm bringing up here is that it's another opportunity to make things more efficient, make things go faster, make things less buggy at the very end.
You touched on a very important part of efficiency that I think gets overlooked a lot, and that is the effort and activity. It's not what you're shooting for. It's the outcome of that activity that you want. And a lot of wasted effort spinning their wheels, doing two different things that are cross with each other is not efficient. So taking a little bit of time to align and make sure you're driving towards the same thing is far more efficient. It's like a bunch of people rowing in a boat. If one person's rowing backwards and everybody else is rowing forward, that's a less efficient motion than if everybody was rowing the same direction, right? And we run into that a lot. That's actually surprisingly what we're talking about is what my company tries to solve after the fact.
Awesome.
Right? You've created the technical debt. You've created these places where there's been a disconnect between the desire and the outcome state. We help you solve that. So the thing that's really interesting to me about that, when you're talking about it with the human interface piece and that model piece, is that organizational structure has such a big impact on people, right? And I always think of the game of telephone you played as a kid. You've got the customer screaming about a problem. Now, the problem is the customer doesn't actually know the problem they want solved. They know the pain they feel from it. They know how it impacts them, but they don't really know the problem. And then you've got a product leader, maybe it's your CEO, right? But you've got the person who's got the vision for how we're going to solve that. They believe they've got a better picture. So you've already gone through one game of telephone, like one party passed to another. And now that's going to get passed to the product manager or whoever, right? It's going to get passed and passed and passed. And it gets to finally to the people that implement it in code, who are playing a telephone with the computer itself, right? They're trying to tell the computer, this is what I want you to do in an imprecise thing itself in the programming language. And so the natural outcome of this game of telephone is you've got a bad translation. You're always going to be off the mark, which means we have to iterate. It means that code has to be thought of as ephemeral, and we all have to converge towards a shared understanding of what good looks like. But we won't start there because we all started from different spots in that game of telephone.
Yeah, that's a fantastic analogy. And one of the things to bring up that is not happening and is not most of us are not taught to do is actually ask a lot of stupid questions or powerful questions, depending on how you look at them, to clarify what the other person is sharing. If you have an act without a sin, you get to UDP communication, which is not necessarily always understood to be received. You need to bring it to TCP in a way that every interaction between the layers that you have just described at least have a higher level of verification that the person listening has received it. And maybe there's a feedback loop to the original party, maybe not the same bandwidth, that allows you to clarify the information you have received. And on top of that, perhaps maybe there is a way to design incentive structure where the pain of the customer can be felt by all the parties who are in a chain.
And that's the hardest part is when people talk about OKRs and KPIs and driving from that is they misalign that and they build their organization. I talked about this particular topic at length, and so I'm sorry if anybody's going to be bored with me saying it again, but like you have to build teams to be durable, but the goals that they have aren't. If you build a team and say your job is to ensure that the product recommendations get better and better and better, that's a terrible goal because we might not do product recommendations in the future. Maybe it's going to have an AI interface, it's going to be something else, whatever, right? I don't want to incentivize a technology choice and a current state of being into perpetuity. However, if I said, I want you to always make sure that the customer is getting better and better things that they'd be interested in buying, and we're going to know that because they're buying more of them. That stays true. I do want that as an e-commerce company, let's say, right? And the second part, like they're buying more of them tells me that's a good signal, but we don't do that. We say, the conversion number needs to go from 5 to 6%, and you need to do better and better product recommendations based on this KPI.
Yeah, and probably write more lines of code. The more lines of code you write, right, the better. The more hours you spend on the computer, the better.
I'm always amazed, though, that how fast that game of telephone falls apart and people don't ask the clarifying questions. And I'll give you my favorite way to test this in an organization, because I've done this multiple times, and I want to see if you think it's nuts or not. But I will get into a team and somebody will say, okay, it'll be done on that date. Please define done for me. And I want everybody else to hear everybody else's definition.
Oh, actually, like you need to do that anonymously, and then they compare, because otherwise they start copying. It's back to the same model of the result and of what work we're actually doing. People forget the outcomes. A lot of people probably don't even know what other people are working on.
Yeah, it's so complex. If you look at any sizable organization, even just 8 people working on something, it is hard to keep tabs on what everybody else is working on. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, and I agree. That's a challenge. Like you have your own context, people have others. But that's where the need of the leader comes in, who is actually aggregating all that into a wholesome picture. Be that a project manager, be a part-time leader, it's their responsibility to do that. Because you have 8 individual contributors working on code, you're bound to run into the issues where there is no coordination. Like you have to define a router or an interface which brings all the results together and gives people meaning to their work, and also tiny beats of information of what everybody else is working on, so they can build their own model and how they relate to the rest of the project.
So when you say that, I think of like the Agile Manifesto and what was intended by it.
the intentions, the positive human intentions.
That fell apart when it got codified into a series of talking points by consultants.
Yes. Well, that's how they got paid. Nobody gets paid for a vision, you know?
If only, right? Yeah, it's an interesting problem. And so like if you were to give this startup community that's listening to this a couple things they need to look for to know if they've got a problem to start with, and like maybe some tools they might leverage to solve it for themselves, what advice would you give them?
Absolutely. I will focus on the conversational piece between 2 parties and how to clarify the information that flows across that channel. 1, try not to solve the problem right away when somebody comes to you with a question. In technology world, we're so guilty about doing that. Why? Because we're so good at it. Problem usually, we don't get the full context. Have some patience to have the person share as many details as possible. Next, ask questions. Are there any more details? It's a funny question. It's a very straightforward question, but it gives you 25% more on average. Number 3, summarize what you've just heard. Don't feel stupid about doing that. You're doing a basic step of making sure that you've heard exactly words in the way that they have arrived, so the other person hears them and understands what they have communicated to you. And then ask, what is the expected outcome? As you mentioned, what the outcome should be and how do they define successful outcome? Is that pressing the button, or the button just shows up on the screen or something like that? So I would say that's sort of like, think of your communication with another person as that way of getting information which might have 50% fidelity, like that JPEG of 50%, maybe like, okay, like 10%, where it's hard to see the details, and you're adding more and more clarity by asking those questions. Like our heads sometimes jump to conclusion and we feel like we got something, but we're then risking the fact that we might not have gotten it. We pride on ourselves that we get things from the very beginning, but there's a high chance that we might not.
Wow, there's actually personal advice in there I'm going to take, and I'm going to give an example of where I've already failed recently on this exact topic. So, lifelong technologist, love to jump to the solution. It's the superpower that we all have, as you described, right? I got into an argument with a VC.
Oh, okay, this is over. I cannot respond to this.
Over what tech debt is. Now, the reality is, what I should have said in that exact moment is, this disagreement is exactly the problem. We all have a different definition for it because we don't see the whole elephant. We're a bunch of blind people grasping at it and feeling the trunk or the tusks or the tail and thinking we have a full view of it. That would have been a great way to describe what we were doing. It's not what I did. It's like, well, hold on. Like, that is also tech debt, and that's tech debt, and that's tech debt, right? Like, just wanted to do that. Now, your point on repeating it back is such an important one that I know I'm repeating it back to everybody else because I know nobody heard it well enough. We all think we understand what's in the other person's head clearly. We believe we do. We make that assumption. Erase that assumption. You don't know. you can put yourself in their shoes from your perspective. You're still carrying your perspective into it. Always assume you don't know and clarify. What I heard you say was this: that definition of done thing, I've run it in every team I've ever run into, and we spent, honestly, an entire day on it, where we would get to a precise definition of what done is. Does it include testing? Does it include, like, what about documentation? Is that matter? Well, yeah, it's not done until there's document, like, whatever, right? You get into that debate so you all agree, but it took the debate and getting down to the nitty gritty to have a firm, clear definition we could all point back to and say, hey, I'm going to be done on December 3rd. And then to go, okay, well, then I'm going to get the docs on December 4th, and I'm going to, do this thing over here with that.
As far as like definition of done and your conversation with the VC and a bit of regret, the unfortunate thing about experience is that it comes after you need it. So
yeah, every time. And well, the best part of that was that turned into a great follow-up conversation with that VC, and
Yes.
that person's now going to be an advisor to us. Like, there's
Awesome.
no downside to that. Like, he wanted to have that argument, and I love being wrong. I honestly love it because I'm learning something if I'm wrong. I have deeply held convictions. I believe I'm right, but I'm often wrong.
We want to be wrong, but it doesn't feel right when we're wrong at all.
Yes, I want to learn. I want to be wrong, but I'm not.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Well, Vladimir, we're almost out of time. I want to give you a chance to point people towards where they can find out more, where they can reach out to you, and they can engage if they need your special knowledge and experience.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for giving me that chance, Hammer. If you would like to hear more, and if you have topics on either human communication or human interactions in your company as a technical executive or as a founder, please do reach out. My website is humaninterfaces.co. That's humaninterfaces.co. And as part of this podcast, I'm offering a free complimentary session, and you can just add /Techtastic.
Techtastic.
Almost got it.
Excellent. And that's a wrap for this episode of Techtastic. I want to thank you personally for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Until then, keep exploring and stay curious. Thank you for listening. If you are new here and enjoyed the content, please subscribe. It really helps us out. And if you are a regular listener, thanks so much for your continued support.
Overwhelmed by tech debt? Discover Vala AI, the solution to tech challenges with the simplicity of a click. No engineering background? No problem. Vala AI enables anyone to effortlessly tackle tech issues, freeing up your time from tech headaches. Make tech debt vanish with Vala AI, where your tech solutions are just a click away.